For centuries, the world has been haunted by legends of vampires and werewolves, pale, blood-hungry fiends lurking in dark forests, cursed humans howling at the full moon, doomed to transform into savage beasts. Most people assume these monsters sprang from the fevered imaginations of medieval Europe, Gothic castles, foggy graveyards, superstitious peasants warding off the undead with garlic and silver. But what if I told you these stories are far older than that? Before the pyramids of Giza rose from the desert sands, before Stonehenge took shape on the English plains, the people of ancient Sumer were already telling tales of blood-drinking spirits and cursed transformations. Today, we're going to journey back over 4,000 years, to the cradle of civilization itself, to uncover how some of humanity's most chilling monsters might have been born in the dusty streets of Sumer. Sumer was one of the earliest civilizations in history, emerging in what's now southern Iraq. Its city Asuruk, Ur, Lagash were bustling centers of trade, writing, and religion. But for all their brilliance in law and architecture, the Sumerians also lived in deep fear of the unseen. To them, the world was alive with spirits and benevolent, many deeply hostile. Death wasn't the end. If the dead were not properly honored, their spirits could wander the earth, unseen and vengeful. Among the most feared beings in Sumerian belief was the Edimu. These were the restless dead people who had died violently, or whose bodies hadn't been given proper burial rituals. Without these rites, it was believed the soul couldn't find peace in the underworld. Instead, it lingered among the living, hungry for what it had lost. The Edimu were described as invisible spirits who could drift through walls, attacking the vulnerable as they slept. They didn't drink literal blood in the modern sense, but they drained life force, breath, vital energy. In essence, they were proto-vampires, spirits who fed on the living to sustain themselves. This fear of the Edimu wasn't just abstract, it shaped how people lived. Sumerians were meticulous about funerary practices. Burying the dead properly wasn't just a sign of respect, it was insurance against haunting. Families performed offerings and rites to feed the spirits of their ancestors in the underworld, ensuring they stayed there. But for those who died without kin, or in war, or by crime, there was the looming threat they'd return angry. Protective amulets and exorcism rituals became part of daily life. Beyond the Edimu, there was a broader spiritual landscape filled with other beings. The Utaku were another class of spirits, some helpful, many dangerous. Evil Utaku, called Lemnatu, were blamed for disease, infertility, sudden deaths. When misfortune struck, it wasn't considered random. It meant a spirit had been angered or unleashed. Exorcist specialist priests would perform elaborate rituals with chants, offerings, and symbolic objects to cleanse afflicted households. The terror of these spirits fell hardest on the most vulnerable. Ancient texts specifically warn of the Edimu attacking children, the sick, and women in childbirth. Nighttime was especially feared. The line between waking and sleep, life and death, was thinned. In fact, some ancient descriptions sound remarkably like sleep paralysis, a crushing weight on the chest, the sense of an evil presence, the inability to move or scream. To the Sumerians, these weren't hallucinations, they were real attacks by hungry spirits. One of the most feared demons in Mesopotamian mythology was Lamishtu. Unlike the Edimu, she wasn't a mere ghost, she was a supernatural entity in her own right. She preyed on pregnant women and infants, sneaking into homes to steal babies from the womb or the cradle. Amulets depicting the demon Pazuzu were used to ward her off. Ironically, one demon was invoked to fight another, but beyond her direct violence, Lamishtu embodied the terror of spiritual corruption. She could transform people specially into ravenous beasts. The idea of turning into a wolf or core of werewolf mythology also has roots here. While the Sumerians didn't have the exact European concept of a man physically changing shape under the full moon, they told of humans cursed to become savage, animalistic, cast out from society. This transformation wasn't voluntary. It was a punishment, a curse from the gods or demons for crimes or spiritual impurity. The change represented a loss of humanity, To become a beast was to be exiled from the human world forever. One of the oldest surviving stories in human history offers a chilling example. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the goddess Ishtar is spurned by a mortal lover. In revenge, she turns him into a wolf, condemning him to be hunted by his own shepherds. This isn't a romantic or tragic transformation, it's a brutal, humiliating punishment. The message is clear: anger the gods, and you'll be stripped of your humanity. Blood held sacred, dangerous power in Sumerian belief. It carried life force, but it could also carry spiritual contamination. Violent deaths, especially murders or suicides, risk leaving angry, hungry spirits behind. Even natural cycles, like menstruation, had careful ritual handling to avoid spiritual danger. The moon, too, was seen as a potent, sometimes threatening symbol. Eclipses were times of cosmic imbalance, when demons might be unleashed. Priests would perform urgent rites to protect the land. Over thousands of years, these beliefs didn't simply vanish. As cultures rose and fell in Mesopotamia, ideas about dangerous spirits, blood-drinking dead, and cursed transformations spread and evolved. When Greek, Roman, and later medieval European storytellers shaped their own monsters, they inherited ancient patterns: the hungry dead, the loss of humanity, the punishment for transgression. Vampires and werewolves as we know them are modern shapes for very old fears. The next time you hear a vampire story, or see a movie about werewolves tearing through the woods, remember, you're watching something with roots thousands of years deep. In Sumer, the cradle of civilization, people were already wrestling with questions about death, the soul, and the darkness lurking in human hearts. Their stories remind us that monsters aren't just entertainment. They're the shadows we cast on the walls of history. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time as we uncover more ancient mysteries and the hidden roots of human imagination. Sumer didn't last forever. Around 2300 BCE, it was absorbed into the Akkadian Empire under Sargon the Great. But Akkadians didn't erase Sumerian culture, they adapted it. They borrowed the cuneiform script, the gods, the myths, and, importantly, the demons. The Edimu, Utuku, and Lamishta didn't vanish. They simply took on Akkadian names and variations. Growing in complexity, exorcists became even more specialized, with ritual manuals detailing hundreds of different spirits and the precise chants and offerings needed to ward them off. The spirit world was mapped like an invisible bureaucracia hierarchy of demons, ghosts, and gods with specific powers and weaknesses. In ancient Mesopotamia, disease wasn't just a medical problem, it was a spiritual invasion. The super professional exorcists were essential members of society. If a child was sick, if crops failed, if a house felt haunted, families would call these experts. They performed ceremonies using incense, water, chants, figurines. Some rituals involved creating clay models of the demon, then symbolically destroying them to banish the evil. These practices might seem strange to us, but they reveal a culture where the boundary between the physical and spiritual was razor thin. To the Mesopotamians, spiritual warfare was everyday survival. Unlike later religions promising paradise or hellfire, the Mesopotamian afterlife was grim for everyone. The land of the dead, Akkala, was a vast, shadowy realm. Even kings and heroes went there to eat dust and drink muddy water. This universal gloom added urgency to rituals honoring the dead. Without offerings, the dead might become resentful Edimu. People feared dying without family to care for their spirits, since such a fate risked becoming one of the wandering hungry dead. Death was inevitable, but being forgotten was the true horror. Perhaps no Mesopotamian demon is as famous today as Pazuzu. Ironically, Pazuzu wasn't a hero, was a demon of disease and famine, but he was invoked as a protector against an even worse threat, Lamishtu. In art, he's shown with bulging eyes, snarling teeth, wings, a scorpion's tail. Families would place amulets of Pazuzu over the bed of a pregnant woman to keep Lamishtu away. It's a striking image, using one monster to fight another. This practice speaks to the complexity of Mesopotamian religion. There was no absolute good or evil, just competing forces you had to navigate carefully. As empires rose and fell in Mesopotamia, these beliefs spread. Assyrians, Babylonians, and later Chaldeans adopted and modified them. The famed library of Ashurbanipal contained hundreds of clay tablets with spells, demon lists, exorcisms. Merchants, scribes, and soldiers carried these stories across the Near East. Over time, elements of Mesopotamian demonology mingled with the traditions of the Hittites, Persians, and eventually Greeks. The hungry dead, the dangerous spirit that must be appeased, the human transformed into a beast for angering the gods. These themes proved incredibly durable. So how do the Edimu compare to the vampires we know today? The Edimu didn't have fangs or drink blood in the literal sense, but they drained life force, breath, health. They attacked the vulnerable in their sleep. They were created by improper burial, a classic, unfinished business ghost story. Like modern vampires, they blurred the line between life and death. Unlike modern vampires, they were contagious in fear. One unburied corpse could breed many restless spirits, threatening an entire community. Similarly, werewolf legends didn't arise in a vacuum. While Sumerian and Akkadian sources don't describe men sprouting fur and claws at the full moon, they do tell of humans being cursed to become wolves. It was punishment, a way to mark someone as outcast, inhuman. The Epic of Gilgamesh contains one of the earliest references to this trope. When Ishtar turns a shepherd into a wolf, it's not romantic, it's horrific. He loses family, livelihood, human identity. That essential idea transformation as punishment, losing one's humanity, is at the core of werewolf lore to this day. Another link between ancient Mesopotamia and modern vampire lore lies in the symbolism of blood. To Mesopotamians, blood was life itself. It fed the gods in sacrifice. It marked covenants. But spilled blood also corrupted. A murder victim's unavenged blood cried out for justice and risked spawning vengeful spirits. This ambivalence blood was both gift and threat, echoes in later vampire stories, where drinking blood grants power, but also curses the drinker with undeath. Fear of the Edimu wasn't just superstition, it was a way of enforcing social obligations. Families had to care for their dead. The community had to maintain ritual purity. The idea that the dead could rise if disrespected reminded everyone of their duties. In a world with no police, as we know them, no universal law, spiritual terror helped keep order. Even today, ghost stories often carry a moral lesson about respecting boundaries, paying debts, caring for the vulnerable. We like to think we've left these ancient fears behind, but our horror movies, our folklore, our superstitions about death are echoes of Sumerian anxieties. We still fear the restless dead, the loss of self, the violence that can't be undone. Vampires and werewolves remain compelling because they dramatize those fears. They are the monsters we made to explain ourselves. In the cracked clay tablets of ancient Sumer, we find the seeds of our darkest myths, not because the Sumerians were primitive or foolish, but because they were human. They looked at death, loss, betrayal and told stories to make sense of them. We still do the same. So next time you hear a werewolf howl or see a vampire's bite, remember, you're witnessing a lineage that stretches back 5,000 years. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the deep past. If you enjoyed this exploration, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future dives into the world's oldest mysteries. Stay curious, stay haunted. See you next time. After the fall of Akkad, Mesopotamia fractured, but its traditions survived. The Babylonians weren't just conquerors, they were cultural archivists. They standardized and expanded Sumerian lore, creating vast ritual libraries with thousands of incantations and exorcism texts. Babylonian demon lists became encyclopedic. Each spirit had its own symptoms, omens, and prescribed rituals. This wasn't coercive, was proto-science, an attempt to diagnose and treat supernatural threats with precision. The Assyrian Empire took these traditions north. Their kings claimed divine sanction, but they also feared divine wrath. They employed court exorcists to protect them from curses and ghosts. We have surviving letters from Assyrian officials begging for ritual help because they dreamed of the dead. Even the most powerful rulers dreaded the Edimu. No one was safe from the vengeance of the unburied. How do we know about these demons today? Much of what we know comes from archaeology. Clay tablets buried for millennia preserved hymns, spells, rituals. In the 19th century, excavators in Iraq shipped entire libraries of cuneiform tablets to London, Paris, Berlin. For decades, scholars painstakingly translated them. The demon lists, incantations, and ritual instructions they uncovered revealed a society obsessed with managing the invisible world. Mesopotamians didn't just fear demands they fought back. Amulets were worn or hung in homes. Lamishta plaques show her image, but also inscriptions commanding her to stay away. Pazuzu heads were placed above beds. Even though Pazuzu himself was a demon, he was invoked to repel worse forces. These objects weren't decorative. They were weapons in an endless spiritual battle. Even today, people hang protective charms or say prayers against evil. The impulse is ancient. Why was fear of the Edimu so powerful? Because it enforced a social order. Families had to perform funerary rites, neglect your dead, and you risked unleashing them on the community. This fear created mutual obligations. In a world without modern law enforcement or welfare systems, spiritual terror was a kind of social glue. The Edimu were the price of forgetting your dead. Mesopotamian demonology didn't stay in Mesopotamia. When the Neo-Babylonian Empire conquered Judah and exiled its elites to Babylon, cultural exchange was inevitable. Some scholars see echoes of Mesopotamian demons in the Hebrew Bible. Lilith, for example, has roots in Mesopotamian Lil-Q demons, male night spirits who preyed on children and pregnant women. The idea of restless dead, or unclean spirits needing exorcism, also gained prominence. Babylon shaped not only Israel's political fate, but its spiritual worldview. When Greeks conquered the Near East, they absorbed local myths. They already had ghosts and underworld deities, but Near Eastern ideas deepened their demonology. Hecate, goddess of witchcraft and crossroads, was sometimes linked to foreign night spirits. The Romans, too, feared the unburied dead Lemures and lava restless spirits needing appeasement. This continuity of fear about improper burial, vengeance, and haunting shows cultural diffusion across centuries. By the Middle Ages in Europe, these ancient fears were transformed but not erased. Ghost stories often punished oathbreakers, murderers, or the excommunicated. Revenants animated corpses rose to torment communities that failed to uphold moral or religious norms. Priests performed exorcisms not just for demonic possession, but to lay ghosts to rest. Though the imagery changed, the underlying message stayed the same. The dead had claims on the living. In Eastern Europe, the vampire legend crystallized these fears. Vampires were often described as returning family members. They attacked relatives first, spreading terror through kinship networks. Communities used elaborate burial practices, staking, decapitation, placing stones in mouths to prevent the dead from returning. This wasn't entertainment. It was social policing, ensuring the proper treatment of corpses and enforcing taboos. Like the Edimu, vampires represented the danger of neglecting sacred duties to the dead. The werewolf also carried ancient DNA. In European folklore, lycanthropy was often seen as punishment for murder, cannibalism, or dealings with the devil. In Sumerian texts, transformation into a wolf was a divine curse. Both traditions use animal transformation to mark the inhuman, the outcast. It's about stripping someone of community and identity, branding them as monstrous. These stories warned listeners about breaking moral codes. Blood remained a key theme from Mesopotamia onward. In sacrifice, it was sacred life force offered to gods, but shed in violence, it defiled. Blood guilt required purification. Vampires embodied this fear. They fed on blood, inverting its sacred role. Drinking blood to sustain unlife was a horrifying corruption of ritual sacrifice. It's no accident that many vampire killing rites resemble exorcisms or purification ceremonies. Despite millennia of change, these fears endure. We still tell stories about the dead returning with a grudge. We still fear being hunted at night by something inhuman. We still use ritual language to protect ourselves from prayers to horror movie cliches like "don't invite it in." These are cultural fossils from Mesopotamia, repurposed for modern audiences. The demons changed their shapes, but they never went away. So when we watch a vampire movie or read a werewolf novel, we're not just seeking a thrill. We're participating in a storytelling tradition that began 5,000 years ago in Sumer. These ancient myths survive because they speak to something real: our fear of death, our obligations to the dead, our terror of losing control. They're mirrors held up to human nature. If you've enjoyed this deep dive, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with friends. Let me know in the comments what ancient mystery you'd like to explore next. Thanks for watching, and remember, history is haunting.